You're listening to The Collected Podcast, bringing you stories that remind us who God is and who we are in Him. The Collected Podcast is a production of Collected Ministries. Follow Collected on social media at Collected Podcast, and be sure to visit thecollectedpodcast.com for show notes and additional content related to today's episode.
Welcome to Season 5, Episode 10 of the Collected Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Biondo, and this week I'm so excited to bring you a conversation with Nicole Taylor. I met her at a women's event that I had the honor of speaking at my church called True Charlotte. And Nicole is an award-winning journalist turned visionary nonprofit leader. She has worked in international orphan care, and she is a foster parent. She's the executive director of Congregations for Kids, which she'll tell you all about. So Nicole, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel so honored.
I'm so excited. And as we get started, I was wondering if you could share with us how you came to know the Lord.
Oh gosh, yes. I was 11 years old and I was at a Dawson McAllister retreat. You're probably too young to know what that is, but it was one of those, I don't even know how they would describe themselves now, but kind of a youth revival, youth group, went there with my youth group. And I grew up in a home, in a Christian home. So it wasn't like I stumbled upon this. This was sort of always a part of my life, going to church. And, but I really made that intentional decision when I was 11 years old. And it's just, me and the Lord have just been journeying together since then.
Yes. And I love that. I always start with that question because I love hearing, it's always so different how God meets people for the first time. And I don't know, it's fun to hear. So as you grew up, then you became a journalist. So as we kind of dive into your story, what was that like? How do you feel like God led you to that and then led you out of it, if I'm correct?
Yeah, I think I'll kind of back up I'll back up just a little bit because I feel like the perspective I have now at almost 42 years old and sort of looking back, I'm like, oh, it's just so interesting to see how God was working. And I just didn't know it at the time. And so when I was probably 8 or 9, I remember just having this just heavy weight on my heart for children without families. And I don't know if it's because I subconsciously realized that at a young age that I just had an incredible family and I couldn't imagine. But I just feel like the Lord sort of sowed that in my heart before I was born. And so around that age, I asked my mom if I could, sponsor a child in another country. And I had seen it on TV or something. I'm like, I want to do that. And believe it or not, I was babysitting at the age of 9, oldest. I'm the oldest, firstborn, so very typical. And so I actually had money to do it. And so I don't say that to say like, whoa, look at me. It's always been such an important part of my life. And so I knew, as you mentioned, becoming a journalist was something I knew I wanted to do when I was as early as high school. I'm like, this is the road that I'm going to go on. And I did go on that road, and it was a crazy, wild ride. But through that time, I was always connected with organizations that had to do with children that were vulnerable. And so, I was a journalist and moved around a bunch, and it was just a little bit of I look at television news now. I'm like, oh my, I have such respect for journalists, but man, it was a really difficult job, and I learned a lot. And I certainly had seasons, I would say, in college, where, I strayed from the Lord. But man, in those dark moments, like, He was always there. So, our relationship, my walk with the Lord has definitely ebbed and flowed for sure. And there's been a couple of pivotal points that have been really faith building for me. But yeah, I was a journalist for 8 years, and then met my husband in Charlotte, North Carolina, and decided to get out of that crazy business. And we wanted to start a family. And I began working with a nonprofit that did computer labs, and they started off doing computer labs in orphanages around the world. And so I was able to come alongside them for a long time. I'm still involved with that organization. So that was really cup filling for me, for sure.
Yeah. When you decide to step away from journalism, do you feel like, was it hard to turn away from something, you had worked so hard in and made such progress in and, won awards in? I feel like there's someone out there who's kind of in a transition like that, of maybe walking away from what they've known for their whole life and worked so hard in, and they feel like God's pulling them in another direction, and yet that's not always easy. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh my gosh. I'm going back there in my mind. It was so difficult. I think because journalism is just it's unique working conditions. It's really hard to work your way up. It's brutal. It's just a hard industry. And it was really hard to walk away, because I'm like, man, I've worked so hard to get here. This has not been an easy ride. And it's not like I was working at the Today Show, right? Like I wasn't at the top yet or anything, but there was still more to, there was still higher to climb for sure. But it took me about almost a year and a half, 2 years to make that decision. And the truth is I was miserable. I didn't want to live this life anymore. I didn't want to, knock on a family's home to ask them how it feels that their child was just murdered. Like I didn't want to be that person anymore. There's a time and a place for those sorts of things, not maybe necessarily that, but it was taking a toll on my soul, and I just could not do it anymore. And so I think there was a couple of stories that I had to cover there at the end that helped me make that decision, but it was really hard to make that decision.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's so in our human nature to want to stick with the miserable known instead of letting go into the unknown.
100%.
Like, does that make sense as I'm processing that? It's like you were miserable in a sense, but you knew what to expect, and it was still comfortable, even if it wasn't like fulfilling who you were created to be and all these longings that God had placed in your heart. But it can be so hard to let go of it for the unknown. And I know there are people listening out there who are in that right now. And I just want to encourage somebody, like, let go of it. Like,
it feels so scary, but man, you could never imagine what could be on the other side. I mean, if you would have told me then what I would be doing now, I didn't even dream of it.
Yeah.
It wasn't even on my radar. So yeah, I mean, that letting go can be so hard.
Yeah. So what are you doing now?
Yeah. So very long story short, when my husband and I got married, I sort of always knew we wanted to adopt, or I wanted to adopt. And he's like, sure, sounds good. And so we had 2 biological children. And when our kids were about 4 and 6, I was like, okay, now's the time. Our youngest is getting ready to go to kindergarten. Now's the time to, go down this road. And because of my work with this other organization, the name of that organization is Retail ROI. Because of my work with that organization, I was pretty well connected to experts in the adoption world and people that do resources and things like that. And through a lot of, I would say, only God moments that we don't have time on this podcast to go through, we decided to go down the foster parent route. Didn't know anyone that had done it. Googled, the county I lived in, foster care orientation. We went through the process of becoming licensed foster parents. And for anybody that knows anything about foster care, it's all about reunification, meaning it's all about healing and restoring families. And as a foster parent, you get to be a part of that. You play a role in that. And so I really felt like that is where God was calling us. I mean, talk about like God sends people, puts people in your path. That happened. It was so clear that, oh my gosh, this foster care thing that I didn't even it was never even on my radar. I mean, at one point within the span of 7 days when we started to think about it, there were 3 strangers that I had never met that literally randomly in conversation would bring up foster care. I mean, by the third person who said it, I just was like tearing up. And it was like at a parent, it was like a student parent meeting conference PTA thing. This woman probably thought I was nuts, but I was like tearing up as she's just like said something about foster care. I'm like, this is so crazy. I've never talked about foster care. And now that we're kind of having this decision and praying about it, 3 people within 7 days that I don't know have talked to me about foster care. So it definitely felt like, okay, God, we're just going to walk into this. And we went on a bit of a roller coaster when we became foster parents with our foster son. And through that experience, and a lot of life was lived, a lot of grieving, a lot of just celebrating. Happy to kind of go into that story. But through there, I was connected to an organization called Congregations for Kids, and they were looking for a new executive director. And it was sort of my skill and my passion that were intersecting. And I did not want this job. I was happy doing what I was doing. But man, what an honor that I was offered that job. And so I've been there for the past 6 years. And what we do at CFK, Congregations for Kids, we're known as CFK. What we do is we work to create champions for children, families, and social workers connected to the child welfare system. And we do that through 4 specific pathways: foster, mentor, serve, give. So I can kind of go into all of that, but that's just real high level of how I ended up what I'm doing today.
Yeah. Oh, it's so cool. I mean, when we let go and give God our yes, he always surprises us. Like,
oh, wow. Yes.
I mean, I get to hear these stories like week after week, and it just blows my mind every time. So as you've been on this journey, what have you learned about the heart of the Lord through foster care?
Such a great question. I don't know why it makes me teary-eyed to think about that. When we had our foster son, it was a unique situation in that he was not going to be reunited with family. And so we got him at 3 months, and we were set to adopt him. And through a lot of details, family then came forward that didn't know he was in care kind of at the 11th hour, and he ended up going with them, which was such a celebration that his story didn't have to be, my family didn't come for me. But it was a really incredible loss for our family. And I went through a grieving process, as did everybody in my family. But the third night after he left, I was grieving differently than my husband. I was seeing a counselor, and the counselor said, you have to get this out. And so I'd kind of go through the day with my family and make sure everybody, do all the things you do as a mom and a wife and, a worker and all of that, an employee. And at night I would stay up late and I would just write and I would cry. And, my husband was grieving differently. He didn't really want to talk about it. And so I remember the third night after Robbie left, I was crying and trying to write things and just get it out. And people have said before, like, oh, I heard from God. And I always wondered, like, are they hearing an audible voice? Like, what does that mean? And I think it means different things for different people, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm sure you've heard lots of different stories. And for me, and I don't really share this to a lot of people but I feel like this is a safe space because it does sound like, some people could be skeptical, but I had my head down on my laptop, on this very laptop I'm on right now. And I was crying and just praying. And I really feel like I heard God's voice. And what he said was, it's not about you. And it was never about us. It was never about us. It was about this boy. And I think that is, to me, that's the heart of our Father. This isn't about things being comfortable and being perfect. And, like I loathe the do whatever makes you happy, this mentality of like the younger generations. I'm like, if I did whatever made me happy, I'd be on a beach in like the Bahamas with a drink in my hand. Like
Yes.
that's not going to be productive. You can't do that every day. So I feel like that to me was just, that was a pivotal moment in my faith, and an extremely faith building moment. And somebody could probably say, gosh, that seems so harsh and hurtful. It wasn't. It gave me such peace to remember that he created me, and he gave me the strength and knew I had it to be able to grieve this. Yes, it was sad, but man, what an incredible honor we had to be a part of this little boy's life. All the fun milestones in that first year that we had the honor of witnessing and being a part of, and yet did my human self, was I still grieving? Absolutely. But in my heart, I had such peace. And it's a hard, those two things were both true.
Yeah. Well, and there's so much freedom in that idea too, that it's not about me. Like God's plan doesn't hinge on me. He's so much bigger than that. And it's such an honor to be a part of his story and that he uses us. But there's freedom in that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's, and that is sort of kind of how I move forward. Like we could have been really burned by that. And we felt burned for a while, for sure. Never did I think I'd be working in an organization that was in this space doing this sort of thing and advocating for people in the system and all of that. But I feel like, God gave us an experience, and man, he didn't have to redeem it this quickly. He didn't have to redeem it on this side of heaven. And how I just feel honored. And yes, many days are hard and it's heavy work. I always say, like, invite me to a party, and when someone asks what I do, like, I'm going to bring the whole vibe down, because it is just, it's hard. It's really sad. You're talking about the most vulnerable children of our cities. But I have to remind myself, and I remind my team too, like, man, we get to do this work. Like, this is an honor. So.
So what maybe encouragement might you have for somebody who's listening, who is who has foster children, or who is maybe in the adoption process and is just struggling, and questioning, like, God, what am I doing? Was this the right thing? I feel like you can maybe relate to that.
Absolutely. And, I thought for sure, we wanted to adopt. And then when we went down this foster road, and God, we were obedient. And now it's a miracle. You've given us a child that doesn't have a family that needs to be reunited with. He's going to be ours. Like, man, isn't this a cute little story that God just, put out there? And I really believed that at the beginning. I'm like, we were faithful and he provided. And that is not how things went, because his story was so much bigger than that. It was so much bigger than that. And did we go through some valleys to get there? Absolutely. Some really deep valleys to get there. And so what I think what I've struggled with through the years is like, is this my want? Is this my voice, or is this God's voice? Is this God's will for me, or is this my own will for me? And I think we all probably struggle with that until, the day we are no longer here. But I think being open to, gosh, I had my heart set on this, and I really feel like I was being faithful, and this is what the Lord was calling me to do. And when a pivot happens, to go to him and to trust that, man, there's a bigger play going on here that I just don't know about yet. And that's so hard. I mean, gosh, that sounds so much easier said than done. And I know, trust me, I know. But I also know what I've seen on the other side of some really hard things. Like, gosh, I didn't even fathom that's where this was going. And so, I don't know if that's so much of an encouragement. What I will tell you is people that are foster parents are the hands and feet of God. Hands down, it is the most selfless thing that you can do in this life, on this earth. It is so hard. So hard. And I will say, we are not current foster parents. We're actually in the process of becoming licensed again because we live in a different state now. But yeah, it's, I would love to give just a virtual hug to anyone out there doing this work, because, we see you, we love you, and God sees you, and these kids need you, if it's for a month, for a day, for forever, they need us.
Mm. Yes. Man, that makes me want to just get out and be a foster parent. I'm not ready yet. I live in 650 square feet.
Okay. And let me say, there is so much that you can do aside from being a foster parent to support these kids in care. So I always feel like that's one of the myths that I have to bust right away. Like, people just think, oh, foster kids. Yeah, I can't be a foster parent, but that's cool. Somebody else can do it. There's so many other things that we can do, whether it's supporting a foster family in terms of like bringing them a meal, praying for them, helping them with childcare, uplifting a child welfare social worker, because their job is so hard. They are frontline workers, just like police officers and firefighters. Mentoring a child that's in foster care, because when they age out and they have no one, the statistics they face, what they're up against is unfathomable.
Yeah.
Immediate tangible needs for these kids and these families that are vulnerable, that may just need that one thing to help stabilize their family. So there's lots of different ways to get involved all over this country, not just here in Charlotte, but everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And I'm assuming resources for all of that are maybe on the CFK website?
Yeah. So in the greater Charlotte area, that's where we serve. It's cfknc.org. So Congregations for Kids NC, North Carolina.org, cfknc.org. And yeah, it's all on there, ways to get involved. And, what I always say to people is, if you just learn more, you become an advocate, and that in and of itself is what we need. So it's not even, oh gosh, I feel pressure to do this or do that if I go to an info session or if I volunteer somewhere. You just learn more and you become an advocate, and then you tell your friends and your community and your people. And that's just how we start to change the perspective of what foster care is. Because, man, there's so many myths around that, which, if I can just plug, I just started a foster care podcast. It's called Foster That. And it's a podcast. Yeah. So it's a podcast. Every episode is 10 minutes or less. And it takes one myth of foster care and it just kind of busts that myth in every episode. So just, again, hoping to create advocates and to just kind of help people understand better what it is that we're actually talking about.
Yes, that's amazing. I'll put a link in the show notes to the website and also to your podcast.
Thank you.
I'll give it a listen. That is so great. How long have you been doing that for?
We just launched it at the beginning of this year. So there are officially, I think, 2 episodes. Third one's coming out next week. So
congratulations.
Thanks. It's so funny
that.
because, I was on TV for 8 years, but speaking to a mic, not in front of anyone is actually harder. I haven't found my footing yet, but I just know the information needs to be out there. So that's one of those things that, like, God's been pushing me to do, I feel like. And I'm like, I really don't want to do this, but okay, I'm going to lean in and just put it out there.
I mean, you just got to say yes, and then he'll make it happen from there.
Yep.
I love it. So, kind of shifting gears a little bit, but it's all related. The tagline on our show is collecting stories that remind people of who God is and who we are in Him. Mm-hmm. So as you have seen God work and move in such powerful ways in your life, what have you learned about who you are as a child of God and like being adopted into His family?
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. I feel, one of the things that I continue to sort of struggle with, but I feel like He's really trying to impress upon my heart here just recently in this last season is, and I don't know if it's like my generation or whatever, but that, you have to work, you work hard and your work is your worth. And I think God has taken away some things recently to show me that is not your worth.
Yeah.
You are loved and cherished without any of this. This is not your identity. And I think sometimes that can get muddy when you're working in ministry, when you're working in this space. It just can be kind of tricky sometimes. And so I think he's been really working on my heart to show me that I am loved and valued minus all of the things. Just me being here. He is I am his child, and I am loved and cherished just like I cherish my own children. And without all the other things, I don't have to prove it.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you remain rooted in that?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out now. Like, how do I really have these daily reminders of that? And I mean, just, practically speaking, for me, it's starting my morning. I have to start it in the Word in some form or fashion to just, your day could go, spiral. But for me, that's what centers me and what works for me. And being around others that can remind you of that, and that can impress that upon you. And, it is certainly not about me to say, like, what are you doing in your life to remain in a, because I think when I say, like, doing this ministry work, running a nonprofit, it can get muddy because sometimes you can make that the replacement for God or for your time with God. Like, oh, I'm doing this work. I'm trying to be a light in this space. And then there's a miss. And I think for a season, there's been a miss for me. Like, oh, wait, no, I have to be centered in the Word, and my personal relationship with God can't be my work relationship with God. Like, that has to be strong, and I have to be centered in that. So I'm constantly trying to, as a busy working mom, trying to make sure that's a priority, because I know when it is a priority, everything else falls into perspective in the way that it should be. But when I let sort of the hamster wheel take over, like, oh, my to-do list, I got to do this, this, and this. And this is for kids in our city. So this definitely is like, God would approve of this.
Yeah.
And not that he doesn't, but just trying to make sure my priorities are in line.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say it's a daily thing for me of just trying to make sure that I'm focused on what's most important.
Yeah. I know it's easier said than done, but so vital. Yeah.
Tell me what your other interviewees have said. You need to come up with a short list for us, Jess.
I know. It needs to be like a tab on the blog of do this, this, and this. But then it becomes about works. Then you're checking the boxes again. It's so, everyone answers so differently, and it's so personal to whatever season God has you in. Some people, I remember one person I asked that question, and she said, you know what? Being rooted right now means I'm not doing daily devotions, because for me, that became a legalistic, if I don't do it, then I'm not enough, and then I failed. She's like, so I had to just stop doing it for a season, So it's it's so different. And I love that about the Lord, that he's so personal to meet us right where we are. And being rooted for me means that I'm not finding my worth in being needed by others. Because that is really difficult for me. And so sometimes being true to who God called me to be means I say no to things that it makes me really uncomfortable to do. But I know that that's not what God has for me, even if I'm going to upset somebody and then I feel like I've lost my value because I'm not worthy of love if I'm not needed.
Everything you just said, check, check, check. Yes, I feel that on a very, very deep level.
Yeah.
I completely empathize with that.
Yeah. I want to circle back. In the beginning, you mentioned a few kind of comments of and then we had some only God stories, but we don't have time for that. I was wondering if we might have time for one of those stories, like a story in your life of when God did something that just blew your mind that only He could have done?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have several of those, but the one that comes to mind is when I'm trying to summarize this in the easiest way that I can. So CFK had been around for quite some time, but they were really becoming their own nonprofit. It was kind of a group that was managed by another nonprofit. And so when I stepped on board, they were becoming their own nonprofit. And kind of a little look behind the curtain, they did not have many resources. I did not understand that when I was hired. Not that anybody lied to me, but I didn't quite understand how beginning phase this was.
Yeah.
And so when I got there the first week and I'm, going through the books and all the things, I realized, oh, this is not what I signed up for necessarily. But I can't explain to you how I felt like the Lord was just like this. To me, the human part of Nicole is saying, this does not make sense. Like, peace, I'm out of here. Didn't sign up for this. Don't need this. Wasn't looking for this. But I felt like the Lord was like, head down. You know what you're doing. I've given you all these experiences before. Like, you can do this. And often people like to attribute like the growth and the resources we've been able to steward, the impact that we've had. They like to say, they like to give me the credit. And I say to my husband all the time, I'm like, man, if someone does not believe in Jesus, I need to tell them about the story of CFK, because there's no way that any of this could have happened with just like, yeah, I work hard, but I mean, I am not a miracle maker here.
Yeah.
And there was just miracles that happened where really this organization should have closed its doors so many times. And, by just putting my head down and really trying to walk this very, very scary walk of faith. It was scary for me. Man, the Lord showed up every single time, and 6 years later continues to do so.
Wow.
It's just unbelievable, whether it's people, whether it's funding, whether it's prayers, whether it's people saying to me, pouring into me in ways I didn't even know that I needed. It has just been such an only God journey. I really wish that I would have this whole time been writing down all these little things. And I have a dear friend who's always like, did you write that down? You need to write it down. I'm like, no, I'll remember. And I'm like, oh, there's just so many ways that, even when things seem hard and when the rest of the world would tell you to turn, I can't explain it. There was just something inside like, nope, I've got you and we're going to do this. And man, every single time. And it doesn't mean it was easy. It was really, really hard.
Yeah.
It was really, do you see all these wrinkles?
No.
It was really, really hard. And it continues to be hard. But when you have those only God moments, and when you have multiple of the, I feel like the more you have, the more you see, like, and it builds your faith. And you're like, okay, yes, this next season's going to be hard for XYZ, or I could feel we're going into a valley. But I'm even that more confident. Am I scared? Yes. Do I want to have wisdom? Am I nervous? All of those things. Yes. Do I have anxiety? Yes. But there is this underlying peace and confidence because of what I have seen him do that is hard to describe.
Yes.
So in that sense, it gets a little bit easier.
Yeah. Yeah. You are speaking to someone very specific right now, I think, who is in that of like, this is not what I signed up for. This is not what I wanted. This is too hard. And God is going to show up for them. I believe it.
Man,
So,
I believe it. I believe it because
whoever
I know
you are
it
out there, God's going to show up.
And listen, I'm the one that like believed, I will say that like, I'm not worthy of him showing up for me. Like, who am I?
Yeah.
I'm just this person out here, and if it happened for me, it's just the goodness and the grace upon grace and upon grace of our Father that, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So as we close, one final question. What did I miss? What would you like to leave us with today? Maybe another story, a word of encouragement, just a final thought that maybe the Holy Spirit's laying on your heart?
I think, one of the things that kind of our family sort of mantra and what I always say to my kids is like, we are here to be a light to others, not to judge them, not to condemn them, not even to beat them over the head with the Bible. Like, that is not what we are here. We are here to be a light for someone to say, what is different about them? Like, I want more of that, whatever that is. I mean, that's what I hope and pray to be, and fail at it, every single day. But I think one of the things that God has shown me in that, as we impress that upon our children. I have 2 middle schoolers. So it's like, please just be a light. I just need you to be a good human. Is even if that's not reciprocated, whether it's caring for someone or, whatever that looks like that is, we don't need that reciprocation. Just like I don't need to work for my worth in the Lord's eyes. Do you know what I mean? And so I think that's hard. Sometimes if we're being honest, we're kind of like looking for a thank you, or we're looking for like, wow, you're amazing. We don't need that. If we're trying to really reflect the love of Jesus, that is not even in the equation. And so I'm not here preaching that. It's what I have just learned in coming out of a couple of difficult situations. And like, I was true to who I think I'm called to be. And that's got to be enough. Yeah. This other stuff doesn't matter. And I think that's, it's human nature is hard, man. Human nature is hard. Like, being a human can be really hard and complicated and lots of feelings, but we're not our feelings. So
yes. Amen. I think that's the perfect note to end on. Nicole, thank you so much for being on today.
Yeah, thank you, Jess. This was an honor. I really appreciate it.
I loved that conversation with Nicole. And as she was speaking, and even as I was kind of preparing and praying about the interview, God brought something to mind that happened to me earlier this week. And I was like, ooh, okay, I need to remember to share this in the outro. So I have been praying a lot just about finances. I'm back in my condo after the flood. If you're watching us on the YouTube channel, you can see my living room. If you're not watching the YouTube, check it out. We do post videos, usually of every episode. So a little plug for that. But I've been, now that I'm back in my condo, I'm not spending like crazy on the extra living costs and all of that. But I'm trying to rebuild my savings, but I've just had some unexpected expenses again. And I just feel like I can't get back to where I was. And so I'm just praying that God would provide. And, He always does, and He continues to. Well, I've been praying this, pretty much all month, pretty consistently. And I get an email from my mortgage lender, with the yearly escrow account update, whatever. And I had a massive overage in my escrow account, which was very exciting to see. But so I go online, I'm looking at the document, and I see that the check was sent 2 weeks prior to when I'm getting this email. So I'm like, wait a second, I should have this money. If this check was sent, is it lost in the mail? Where is it? So I'm going through a stack of mail that I just hadn't opened. And there it is. It's been sitting there for over a week. The thing I had been praying for and waiting on God for was already there. I just hadn't bothered to open my mail because I thought this letter was about something else from my lender that wasn't as urgent. And when I saw that the check had been there for almost a week already, I felt like there was something there in this idea of you gotta open your mail. Obviously, I'm speaking in an analogy here, whatever your mail is. Maybe mine was very literal. But I felt like maybe this speaks to someone out there of the thing you're praying for is actually already right in front of you. You're just missing it. So whatever this means for you today, open your mail. I don't know. That's all I have. As I was praying about this episode, I was like, somebody out there needs to know they need to go open their mail. Maybe it's literal. Maybe this is an analogy, but we're just going to run with it. So that is my message I'm leaving you with today. Open your mail and see what God is going to do and what he has already done. The thing you're praying for, it's done. So just walk in it. Open it. Oh, there you go. So I hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Collected Podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. And if you like what you've heard, we'd love it if you'd help spread the word. Check back here for new episodes dropping every other Thursday. You can follow along on social media at Collected Ministries.